Hello folks, Halcylion here. It's been a while since our journey started. 5 years, 1 month and 10 days to be precise, and in this time I got farther than I ever expected. I am Lord of Seonon and Remtoil. I have a retinue of 100 elite archers and another 500 soldiers in reserve. There's no need to mention my wealth because I'm able to make this amount of money in a single day if I really tried. Many people would consider this to be the pinnacle of their journey, the end game, and even I have entertained the thought of retiring and living a peaceful life within the walls of my city, but I had a change of heart. What's the point of all this wealth if you won't use it to make the world a better place? Nah, who am I lying? I'm running a corporation. The only thing that matters is to make a fat pile of gold, and hey, if the world gets better in the process by some miracle, I'll be happy, but if it doesn't, I'll cry about it on my bed made of money. With that said, I would like to welcome you to the final episode of Trader Stories. Don't you worry, this is not the last you'll see of Harald, but this chapter of his life is nearly over, so I cannot call the rest of his adventures trader stories, since there's almost no trading involved. Now, it's time to tell you about my final preparations. It all took a very long time and it was quite a tedious process, and because that was so exhausting, I will avoid getting into too many details. Today's journey was completely chaotic, and instead of telling you about everything exactly as it happened, I'll just try to provide some structure to the narrative and explain the rationale behind most of my decisions. Let's start with the fuel of my medieval war machine, money, and how it factors into the plans for sustaining my ever-growing nation in the long term. Not too long ago, I discovered that one of the most commercially viable activities is crafting certain swords and then selling them to a lord for an unbelievable amount of money. The lords pay less than half of what a sword is worth, but 50,000 for a sharp piece of iron is still pretty good, especially when you can sell 40 of these and get 2 million at once. I initially tried using this method to bankrupt other lords, but somehow they can sell these swords somewhere for full price. If I venture to take a guess, I'd say it has something to do with a legend I've overheard in my travels. Nothing concrete, just bits of information I pieced together about a certain king who rules a land to the far south of the Great Azerai Desert. Supposedly, this king is quite literally swimming in gold and he's just giving it away to everyone. But recently, he's gained a peculiar interest in certain Calradic weapons, and he is building a collection, and now he graciously offers a life-changing amount of money to anyone who can bring these weapons to him. I'm assuming he's sent intermediaries all over Calradia, but I can't find any of them. I'm guessing the lords who buy my weapons know exactly where to find these intermediaries, and that's how they turn my weapons into gold. But that's just a theory. A game theory. There's no way to verify these rumors, but as long as I get paid for my weapons, I don't really care. And I can forge a lot of these as long as I have materials. I only have energy to craft 3 swords in a single day, but so do my companions, which are currently busy leading their caravans, earning me a pitiful amount of dinars every day. This money is barely enough to pay the wages of my troops. I have to disband these caravans. I've invested over 100 grand into all of them, and losing that money is not what hurts most. But the skills I wasted trying to make caravans viable, that is my biggest regret. I should have focused on workshops instead. Oh well, doesn't matter anymore. Let us look towards the future. With the caravans disbanded, it's time to pick my companions and add them to my warband. Yakim the Swift returned to Seonon right into my arms. Moranon was waiting for us in Karban Seth, and the other 3 fellas are in Vlandia, Provend and Charas respectively. As I was heading towards Karban Seth and Vlandia, my path would take me through every major battanian fortification, so while I'm at it, I should inspect their garrisons, then keep an eye out for battanian archers. You already know they're the best in business. I remember Pendrake Castle had quite a lot of these, but let's see the other ones. Abcomer has a decent amount of archers, Pencanok has several as well, Aster Castle has a few, and oh my god, 44 highborn warriors are stationed in Karban Seth, along 20 other sharpshooters, so I have to buy this town and claim these soldiers for myself. However, I can't afford it yet. I need to get my companions and start smithing. But my final preparations involve multiple objectives, and I can't just focus on one at a time. I have to multitask. One of my goals is building a reputation and bringing fame to my clan, and the fastest way to do that is to provoke a war with one of the major factions and defeat their armies repeatedly, but there are safer ways to get the street cred. Hunting for small packs of bandits and wiping them the fuck out of existence. But commanding an army of 100 to fight 30 looters is beneath me, so I shall leave it to my men to auto-resolve these battles. If I'm not there to lead them, some of them can die, but that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. If they were my fians, I would take good care of them, but my main force is stationed in Seonon. I just carry a contingent of easily replaceable troops. And even though I'm going to have a lot of fians, I won't take them with me everywhere I go. They are the Calradian Special Forces, and they'll only accompany me on missions more suited to their talents. Until their time comes, they're better off defending my capital. Anyway, eventually I put my team together and we spent some time at the forge. When we had materials, we just crafted 18 swords per day. When we didn't, we turned wood into coal and smelted random weaponry for iron and steel. Then we'd keep on working. I even crafted myself the biggest falx in existence and named it Ancestor's Pride, and I couldn't wait to use it in sieges to pull the defenders from their walls, but there was a small problem with it. It's too big to be wielded with one hand. So then I forged another with a shorter handle, which I named Ancestor's Wrath. It's very important for my sword to be used with a shield, especially in sieges where there's a constant barrage of arrows waiting to turn you into a colander. If you paid close attention to my smithing, you may notice that my wife is not with us. She's actually leading a small warband with the rejects I exiled from Seonon. I had to clear up some space for the elites I'm about to garrison in the capital. Or should I name it the Capitol? Sounds more pretentious this way. Capitol it is. Eventually I'm also going to have to send Swift and Falcon to lead their own warbands, but by that time they'd have crafted enough swords to make me a multi-millionaire. After several days of forging, we had a lot of falchions for sale, but we would need a buyer. I've previously done deals with Monchuk, but since then, I've learned that whoever buys my swords is going to double his money, so if I make someone richer than myself, I have to choose that person carefully. Caladog. In time, I would only make business transactions with my own vassals, but I am not a king, as my clan is yet to reach tier 4. Anyway, on my first sale, I gave Caladog 32 swords and he gave me 1.4 million. And on the second, he paid 1.6 million for 37 swords. I've also struck some deals with other battanian noblemen, and after a while, I was literally a multi-millionaire. I would then use my wealth to perform that unorthodox method of soldier recruitment where I buy a castle, take out the veterans and exchange that fort with another whose garrison is still intact. As I've said, this did not happen in sequence. I didn't focus on one thing at a time and then I moved on to something else when I was done with the first thing. I've jumped between so many activities hundreds of times. One moment I'm in the forge, the other I'm hunting bandits, and then I find myself organizing troops between my 3 forts, and I would even chase after battanian lords to sell them my swords or buy their fiefs. Speaking of which, there's a fief I previously owned and I sold and I need to buy it yet again. Uthelheim Castle. The legion I'm building is going to be huge and I've broken down their ranks into 3 separate divisions. The Special Forces division, comprised of fians and veteran infantry, will protect the capital, Seonon. Ideally, none of the troops stationed here are below tier 4. The second best soldiers, which I will refer to as the Reserve, shall be garrisoned into Remtoil Castle. Then the third division, which I will unflatteringly call the Fodder, will be comprised by the soldiers that I will only use when human life is not a priority. They are the most disposable of the lot. Volunteers, recruits, militiamen and trainees will all be sent to Uthelheim Castle, which is the first to be attacked in the event of a Mongol invasion. Or any invasion from the east, really. Now, stationing troops in your fiefs can be a bit convoluted. I mean, towns are straightforward enough. If Seonon has a garrison capacity of 500, then you can safely leave 500 soldiers behind, but that doesn't happen with castles. Because if a castle can accommodate 400 soldiers in its garrison and you fill it to capacity, you will quickly find out that the food store is gonna run out, because castles cannot be manually supplied with food by their lord. No marketplace, you see. A castle must rely on its bound villages and gardens to supply food to its defenders. It took me a while to figure out exactly how many soldiers to leave in each garrison to ensure they don't go starving. I also made it a priority to build up the gardens in both of these castles, and I made sure the treasuries had more than enough money to keep building every project I lined up. There was a lot of tedious micromanagement involved. If I had to talk about it in detail, I'd probably lose my mind, so I'd just rather forget about it all. The information I've already provided so far must suffice. Anyway, now you know a little about how I've organized my legion. Each division is sitting nicely in its own fort, and I can swap my warband to fit my needs. At some point I took out all the cavalry with me so that we'd move faster on the map, useful for raiding or forceful recruitment. But the highlight of this phase was when I finally tracked down Melidir and purchased Caravan Seth from him. Over 60 Fians in training. They were all sent to Seonon, after which I gave Carbon Seth to Caladog. It's in my best interest to give all the fiefs I'm not using to the ruler instead of his vassals. This way, they get to feel betrayed by their king who is holding all the land to himself, which will lead to them becoming disloyal and eventually joining me, the person who will give their fiefs back. After they pay me for it, of course. When all of this was settled, I only had one clear goal left to accomplish. Founding my own kingdom with Bagchal and courtesans. Can't do that, however, till my clan is tier 4, and the best way to get there is to engage in warfare. I ran away from my duties at first. I was hesitant to attack one of the larger factions, so I tried everything else. Chasing down bandits with my cavalry, taking my Fians to raid bandit hideouts, fighting in tournaments, and I did gain a bit of renown this way, but it was very slow. Eventually I picked the Western Empire as my target. They're barely hanging by a thread, with 2 clans and 2 castles. I can't formally declare a war unless I'm in a kingdom, but attacking one of their parties with no provocation automatically triggers a war, so as soon as I ran into Garios, the Western Emperor, it was on. The balance of power was heavily slanted in his favor, mainly because I did not have my professionals with me, and we were outnumbered. But with some basic tactics in place, we put up a good fight. The battle took place in an open field, but luckily for me, the Emperor did not have too many cavalry units. It was mostly infantry and archers, much more experienced and better equipped than my lot, but not impossible to beat. So I put my archers in the front line, and I had the infantry form a shield wall behind them. As the enemies approached, they started falling before our arrows. I personally managed to take out a recruit and 5 elite soldiers with my marksmanship. But this would be over in an instant. After just a few salvos, I was forced to bring forth the shield wall, and my infantry could not withstand the full frontal assault. But with my help, we called enough enemy infantry to buy time for my archers to mop up the rest of them. The enemy infantry was finished, but there were still archers to deal with, and even though I had a small numeric advantage, I feared that the spirit of my soldiers would break before their enemy. But that was not the case. My soldiers fought to the last man. Well, to the last 19 men, that's how many were still alive at the end of the battle. Technically we had a lot more survivors, but most of them were wounded, myself among them. I personally managed to take out 10 enemies, 1 recruit and 9 elite infantrymen. I fully believe that without my tiny contribution, those elites would have been enough to overwhelm my remaining 19 archers. But the day was won, and this battle earned 40 renown to my clan, 10 times more than your usual bandit hunt. I also took Garius prisoner. I usually let lords go after a battle because that gains you the respect of their clan, making it easier in the future to recruit them to your army, or rather, kingdom. But Garios and the rest of the rulers are too proud to bend the knee, so being their friend is superfluous. Anyway, after this Pyrrhic victory, I had to return home and lick my wounds. My war efforts would eventually cause some disorder in my ranks, as I would start stationing troops wherever I could, instead of organizing each division into its proper fort. But as long as my Fians are in Seonon, nothing else matters. I've had a lot more battles since then, but only a few of them are noteworthy. One of these was a battle I was sure I could win. 120 veteran cavalry against an army of 198 Imperials. Should be easy as pie. That thought quickly dissipated, and I was overtaken with dread when I saw my horsemen dropping like flies without making a dent in the enemy troops. And then my own mount was slain. I sounded the retreat, one of my soldiers picked me up on his horse and we ran as fast as we could. But the army was still on our tail and we couldn't escape, at least not all of us. We had to leave the wounded behind, and a few of the capable men were valiantly volunteered to cover our escape. 31 horsemen died so that their failure of a commander could run away. I also had to leave behind some precious smithing materials, food, gear and horses, but they are insignificant to the loss of my soldiers. In one bad decision, I lost all the cavalry I assembled for all this time. I suppose I'm lucky it wasn't my Fians, that would have been a crushing defeat. But I would have my revenge on Tynops. With tail between my legs, I returned home, and this time I took some veterans with me. Not the elites, but the reserve. And then I searched for Tynops' army. Last known location, Jalmaris. It was strange when I got in town and I could not see any Imperial banner, but that's only because my enemy prepared an ambush. It was very well executed, I admit. He got me right at the gates, but what he didn't realize is that this time I'm prepared for his tricks. He was about to witness the splendor of the battanian shuffle. It's a tactic I developed against an overwhelming frontal assault. It's not that different from the tactic used in my first battle, just slightly more complex. First, I must organize my warband into 3 separate groups, an infantry line and 2 archer divisions. Then I would place 1 archer division in the front line, put the other behind it, and form a shield wall behind the archers. If the archers are nicely spread out, they can easily shoot at the enemy when he advances, and when their infantry is close, I simply move my first group of archers to one of the flanks while the other is laying down suppressing fire. Immediately after, I order my shield wall to move in front of the remaining archer group, and then I move the archers to the other flank. Unfortunately, if you're an infantryman when I execute the shuffle, your chances of survival are very low, but you should take comfort in the fact that my chances of victory are very high. Because when the infantry falls, if the enemies still stand, they have 3 options. Charge the left flank and get shot in the back, charge the right flank and get shot in the back, or spread out between the 2 and get shot in the front, because you're divided and you cannot even reach the archer lines. There's also the option to turn away and run, but that guarantees that you get shot in the back, so it's not really an option. After my infantry and the enemies are lying face down in the mud, I should still have enough archers left to deal with the remaining enemies who still haven't fled for their lives in the confusion. Bye bye Tynops, hope you've enjoyed our dance. The reason I say farewell to Tynops is because I did not take him prisoner. His clan is potentially recruitable and it would be nice for us to be friends. But the same can't be said about his ally, Nemos, who is part of the ruling class and will never submit to me. Can't allow him to lead his army anytime soon. That battle earned me another 42 renown, but even with the war, we are progressing slowly and I need to be more efficient. I thought laying siege to their castles would provoke more armies to come to me, but something different happened. You see, I only have 120 men and this castle has 430. There's no way I could beat them in a fair fight, so I just wanted to starve them out until an enemy army arrived, but the defenders pressed their advantage when they sallied out to meet my army in an open field. I know this is a common tactic, but I honestly did not expect the enemy to do that, so my options were limited. I could try to fight my way out of this, but I would lose. I could also leave half my army behind and try to make a run for it, but I don't want to do that because these are veterans. Or I could be scummy. I positioned my archers up on a hill, waited for the enemy to charge us and we rained arrows upon them. When the foe closed in, we would feign a retreat and then re-engage, repeating this maneuver, and on every attempt 50 of them would fall, barely inflicting any casualties on our ranks. After about 5 feigned retreats, only 191 enemies remained, versus my 118 soldiers, and yet the balance of power was even. No more feigned retreats from here. The terrain was advantageous and I had no need to use advanced tactics. I simply positioned 1 row of archers in the back, put another row in front of them, and I had the shield wall hold the front line. At first they tried using their 60 archers to harass us with arrows, but their peasant militia was no match for my trained crossbow mercs. Then they got desperate and tried sending what remained of their infantry, but they too got mowed down, and by the time the 20 survivors clashed with my swordsmen, it was too late for them. They realized their doom, and with terror in their hearts, they tried running away. Unfortunately for them, in the heat of battle, I cannot articulate to my soldiers, "Don't shoot the ones who run, only shoot the ones who still fight." Too many words, you see, and by the time I speak that phrase, everyone is dead, so it doesn't make a difference. There were still some archers left who tried to do their best, but they had no chance. My mercs made short work of them. This triumph rewarded me with 60 renown, but I'm not going to lie. I feel dirty for using this tactic and it feels like a hollow victory. But my other choices would have meant my doom. I hope to be more careful in the future so that I never have to use this tedious tactic ever again. But it's not all bad, because the defenders were defeated, the castle was empty, for the most part, and ripe for the taking. Only 22 defenders left inside, they have no chance against my 100 troops. They did knock me out as I was trying to scale the walls because I got careless, but my men took the castle and tended to my wounds. All in all, a great victory, even though I had to claim it through dishonorable means. But this castle is a liability because it is deep into the enemy territory and too far from my other fiefs to properly be defended. If only I could magically turn it into money and be done with it. Oh wait, silly me, I have the perk. You know, the thing I worked on for 4 years, the only thing that makes trading worth it, so let's put it to use. As you know, Caladog is getting old at I capture if I don't want to bother with it. But before I chase him down, it would be a good idea to visit nearby villages and towns, recruit some mercenaries and leave behind a skeleton crew in the garrison of this castle. It's also a good idea to train some militia to make it harder for the enemy to take it back, buying me time to go to Caladog and get paid for my work. But not before selling my spoils of war for about 40,000 in Zionica. Fighting lords is not a bad way of making money, but it pales in comparison to selling swords or fiefs to them. Still, it's a good way to supplement my income since I'll be on a warpath for God knows how long. I can't easily find buyers when I'm fighting an enemy that outnumbers me by several thousand men. I did not take long to catch up to Caladog, and he offered to pay me nearly 500,000 for this castle. When swordsmithing gets nerfed, this will be my main way of making money. Taking castles from enemy factions and selling them to the highest bidder. This is why I spent 4 years in the markets of Calradia. I actually got more than 1 million out of Caladog because I also sold him some swords I forged in the meantime. After the sale, I got a great idea. The Western Empire is in possession of another castle, probably with a similar defense force as Onika. I don't want to rely on scummy tactics again, but perhaps I could assemble my special forces and take the castle with their help. I can only lead 130 men in battle, so if I want 3 equal divisions, I'll have about 40 men in each group. In Group 1, the infantry is made out of crossbowmen. They can improvise a shield wall, unlike the archers. Group 2 would be formed out of 40 battanian heroes, and in Group 3 I've placed 40 highborns. Every single one of us is armed with a ranged weapon, and before the enemy can close in, they'll have to survive a constant barrage from 130 archers, and then deal with the battanian shuffle, if we're fighting in an open field. But I was going for a castle, and the enemy made a crucial error, putting a wall in between themselves and my archers. They're like fish in a barrel. They stood a better chance of defeating us if they sallied out, but as it were, they are easy pickings for my archers. One thing to note is that at the start of the battle, my fighting force was divided into 2 groups of 65 men, and that is not good. They would all be clumped together, making them easy targets for enemy archers, but you can transfer troops into other divisions on the fly, so I turned my 2 groups into 4, keeping them somewhat separate from each other but focused on the same front so that enemies would pile up and become sitting ducks for my fians in training. Everything worked well for the most part. I was hanging onto the ladder, trying to smack people's heads with my thoughts while the archers filled them with arrows. Then the wall somewhat cleared and I climbed on top, but it did not go well for me. One of the defenders managed to knock me out and my men rushed to my aid. They could have safely shot the enemy from the outside, but they chose to charge and climb the ladders if I wasn't there to tell them to stand still and keep firing. In their assault, 57 of them have fallen, 22 never to get back up again. If I prioritized my safety, these men would still be alive, but their sacrifice will not be forgotten. They have made their mark in the world, most notably to my bank account, because I would sell this castle for another 422,000. Still, Fian's lives are worth more than money because they are irreplaceable until I can forcefully recruit forest bandits and train them into Fians once I become a disciplinarian. But to do that I will need to crown myself king and start leading armies to build up my skill. King is the popular term. I resent that title. I prefer chairman. Chairman Harald. But to get there I still got some work to do and the war with the West is going slowly. There's too few enemies who are mostly avoiding me instead of trying to wipe me out. Eventually Garrison put together an army of 200 people, but they too witnessed the battanian shuffle and, well, the results are self-explanatory. 105 killed, 53 wounded, 48 routed, and Garrison imprisoned. 0 casualties on our side. But the hardest part of this war is actually getting into fights, which is the sole reason I started it, and I was losing my patience. I was still 95 renown away from tier 4, but I needed something better. So I chased after Tephilos, who narrowly escaped the jaws of death in the previous battle, and negotiated a peace. All I had to do was release his emperor and shake on it. I need a more challenging enemy, the Southern Empire. They have a lot of territory, a lot of lords, and a whole lot of mercenaries. They won't run from me. They'll go for the throat. I tried searching for one of their bannermen and destroy his army as an act of war, but they were all pillaging the countryside somewhere else. I had to resort to crime. A group of villagers was heading into town to sell their goods and I told them to stop. I recognized these men. They sold me their workhorses when I was trying to make ends meet as a trader. It pains me to do this, gentlemen, but I need to send a message to your leaders that their reign is over. I had to spill innocent blood to provoke a war. I don't feel good about this, but I am in a hurry to prove how good a leader I will be. And yes, all monarchs and lords do this. Villages get raided all the time, cities get sieged, and civilians are murdered just to cripple a nation's economy. I hope to never do this again, but the lords I will enlist might do it in my name, so either way, my hands will never be clean. With one strike, I provoked one of the largest factions to come for me. It was time to run for the hills, for the mountains actually, because I need to protect my territory. It didn't take long to receive notice that one of my villages is getting raided. I'd like to save it if I can. Chalia has actually rode to the defense of this village and stalled my enemy until I showed up and put him out of his misery, earning a nice 22 renown with almost no casualties. I also recovered a couple of camels, peculiar mounts. I may want to build a collection like someone else I mentioned earlier. While waiting for enemies to show up, I would spend my time patrolling the land, recruiting people, managing city projects and smithing more weapons. After all, I can always use more money. Shortly after, another of my villages got attacked by a mercenary company in Ragea's employ. As I rode to its defense, who do I run across? The Empress herself, leading 234 men to siege my castle. Unbeknownst to her, she led them to their deaths because I had the elites at my back. And the terrain we're fighting in heavily favors the Fians. We are in a canyon. I can easily have my crossbows in the middle and give the archers the higher ground on both flanks as we set up our ambush. And I wasn't alone. Yakim the Swift, who is now leading her own warband, joined in the attack. Battanians, together strong. It took me a while to get my bearings. I've never fought in the mountains before and I wanted to avoid mistakes. I did eventually find a good position for all my men and they've done their jobs in an exemplary fashion. The crossbows slowed the Imperials' advance while the Fians tore them to shreds. But they still closed in and I had to order my front line to form a shield wall and engage the enemy with their swords. Because of several tactical hiccups on my part, we lost a lot more soldiers than we should have, but very few of my own, most of them were Yakim's soldiers. All in all, we were victorious, and my Fians were still alive and well. Afterwards, we reached Remtroil just in time to defend it against the Karakerjit riders raiding it. I could easily position my troops in some shallow water and have them shoot their enemies. It wasn't a difficult fight, although the 4 soldiers that died in my service would disagree. Still, they knew the risks of the soldier's life and they fought valiantly. But I've yet to achieve my goal of reaching tier 4. I crushed a small band of 20 bandits and barely squeezed some renown out of them, but it was all going to be over when another of my villages was attacked by the Brotherhood of the Woods. With my Fians in tow and Yakim by my side, we rode forth to meet the raiders, who by the way, fancy themselves protectors of the common folk. Yeah, right. I can't say the fight was challenging when there's 145 of them against 180 elite troops. When we arrived in the village, all I had to do was spread my archers out in the shallow waters and allow the enemy to charge us with full force. But the enemy did not charge. I have no idea what they're doing. But it didn't take long for most of them to take to their heels. A few still remained, so I went forth to charge them and I made my own contribution to the pile of bodies on the ground, but it was my archers who convinced the rest of them to turn tail and run. I mean, look at this Falksman. He's wearing lightweight gear and he's very athletic, and he used that to his advantage, to run away as fast as he could. I need to find this guy and make him a general. Clearly, he's too smart to be a simple Falksman. Or maybe he was intimidated by the fact that he saw me wield a fox with just one hand. But the leader of the raiding party is a man of unshakable convictions and he refused to flee for his life. We dueled and in 2 swings he was eating dirt. Don't worry about him, he's probably just got a few broken ribs. His armor kept him alive. Can't say the same about the archer that stood by his side until the last moment. I commend him for his loyalty, although I doubt he cares right now. At the end of the battle, I allowed Brand to go free on the condition that he tells everyone about my deeds on the battlefield. This is how I built my brand in Calradia. After this battle was concluded, I obtained enough fame that my clan reached tier 4 and I could now establish my kingdom, but as king, I am free to do whatever the hell I want. And I want my kingdom to be the very first megacorporation in Calradia and pave the way for this land to finally become civilized through the power of capitalism. But until then, there's a lot of work to do and it will all be relayed to you in the next part of Trader Stories, which will take another name, Corporate Reports. I don't yet know what to call my corporation, but I know we'll mostly specialize in security contracting, hostile takeovers, the acquisition of real estate and eventual sale of property. And it will all be thanks to my Fians and you, who have taken time out of your day to watch my journey through Calradia. Thank you. Well folks, this was it for Trader Stories. I hope to see you next time. Till then, goodbye.